The call comes on a Tuesday. You are 25 years old. You are eating lunch at your desk when your phone rings with a number you don't recognize from an area code you don't live in. The voice on the other end is measured and precise in the way that lawyers are measured and precise. He says your name once, confirms a date, and then uses a sentence you will spend the next several years trying to fully understand. He says you are now the principal of the family office. You say, okay. He says there are people who need to meet with you by end of week. You say, okay again. You finish your lunch. You do not know what a principal is yet in the way that actually matters. By Thursday, you are sitting in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building you have never been in. The table is long. There are 8 people seated around it waiting for you. 5 more are joining by phone. The leather chair at the head of the table is empty. Someone gestures toward it. You sit down. The assets under management are $500 million. The office operating budget runs between $2 million and $4 million per year. There are 14 people whose professional lives are now organized, at least in part, around you. You did not interview for this. You did not apply. You did not earn it. That fact sits in the room with everyone and no one mentions it. The first thing they give you is a calendar. It is not a calendar in the way you have had calendars before. It is a structured sequence of briefings, each one an hour, each one representing a different dimension of a financial life you have just been handed. Security protocols come first, not metaphorical security, actual security. There are people who know what you now control, and there are protocols for how you move, who contacts you directly, which numbers are secure, and how your digital footprint is managed going forward. The word principal, you learn, is not a title. It is a function. It means the decisions stop with you. It means 14 people can advise, structure, execute, and optimize, but the actual authority lives in the chair you sat down in on Thursday. You meet the core operators one at a time. The CIO is 51 years old. His name is David Park. He has managed the portfolio through 2 recessions and one period the family refers to only as the restructuring. His salary is somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 annually, depending on the year and the performance metrics written into a contract you have not read yet. He manages the allocation. The current structure is roughly 60% public equities and fixed income, 30% alternatives, 10% cash, and near cash equivalents. He talks for 40 minutes about risk-adjusted return and correlation and tail risk. You understand approximately 60% of it. You write down the words you don't and look them up that evening in a hotel suite the office booked for you. The tax counsel is named Karen Walsh. She does not discuss investments. She discusses structure, trusts, entities, filing, jurisdiction, the difference between what the family owns and what you can access, and why those are 2 different things. The estate attorney handles governance. What happens if you die? What happens if you become incapacitated? What the documents say about distributions, amendments, succession. The office president, a woman named Sandra Obi, runs the machine. She manages the staff, the vendors, the physical office, the compliance calendar, the relationships with custodians and prime brokers. She has been doing this for 11 years. She knows where everything is. The concierge is not a concierge in the hotel sense. His name is Marcus. He handles logistics and privacy, travel, housing, medical coordination, family requests, the practical frictions of a life at this level. You will understand what he does better by the end of the week than you do right now. On Friday afternoon, after 4 days of briefings, after the security protocol and the allocation overview and the trust documents and the tax structure, Sandra closes her folder and looks at you directly and asks a question no one in the previous briefings has asked. She says, "What do you want to do with your life now?" She is not being philosophical. She is asking operationally. The office needs a direction. The team can manage the assets without your daily involvement. They have been doing exactly that, but the question of what the principal wants, what the family money is supposed to accomplish over the next 10, 20, 40 years. That question requires an answer from you. You sit with it. You do not have one. There is no job description for inheriting. There is no onboarding document that tells you who you are supposed to become. The silence lasts longer than you expect, and Sandra does not fill it. She lets it sit. That silence is the first honest moment of the week. The freedom moment comes Sunday. Your younger sister calls. She has been dealing with the medical situation for 3 weeks. She has been waiting on a specialist appointment, and the earliest available slot is 6 weeks out. You tell her to hold on. You call Marcus. Marcus calls you back in 22 minutes. The appointment is Tuesday, not in 6 weeks. Tuesday. A different specialist. A better one. Marcus handled the coordination, the insurance interface, the travel if needed. You did not navigate a phone tree. You did not wait on hold. You did not fill out a form and submit it and wait. You made one call and the friction disappeared. You sit with that for a while too. Not with guilt exactly. With clarity, this is a different category of life. The assets are $500 million. The team costs $2 to $4 million a year to maintain. And even if you do nothing, even if you touch nothing, even if you sit in that chair and stare at the table, the machine keeps running and the bills keep coming. That is week one. That is where this starts. Month one teaches you the difference between owning something and controlling it. The $500 million is not yours in the way your checking account is yours. It never was. The family spent 3 generations building structures specifically designed to prevent any single person from moving it impulsively. Those structures now apply to you. The principal trust holds the core assets. You are a beneficiary and a named decision maker, but not a unilateral one. There is an investment policy statement, 47 pages, written by the previous generation in consultation with outside counsel and 2 institutional consultants. It specifies asset class ranges, rebalancing triggers, liquidity floors, prohibited instruments. It was last amended 4 years ago. You did not write a word of it. It governs every significant decision you will make. The distribution policy allows for $15 to $20 million annually, roughly 3 to 4% of AUM in a family office of this structure. That sounds like an enormous number. Then you learn that roughly $2 to $4 million of it runs the office before you see anything. Staff salaries across 14 people, including David Park, at somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 depending on the year, technology infrastructure, compliance, legal retainers, custodial fees, the building lease, Marcus. The machine that manages the $500 million costs real money to run. What remains after overhead is distributed according to a schedule, quarterly, through a committee, with documentation. You do not call Sandra on a Thursday and tell her to wire $3 million to a new account by Friday. That is not how this works. That is not how this was built to work. Month 3. You begin to understand what no one questions and what requires a meeting. The upgraded apartment, no one questions it. The car, a $200,000 range that your predecessor drove for 7 years, it surfaces in the expense report and clears without comment. First class travel, coordinated through Marcus, it is already in the operating protocol. These are the ambient expenses of life at this level. They are priced in. Nobody holds a committee session over the car. What triggers a board conversation is different. Selling the operating business that sits inside the family's private equity sleeve that requires a unanimous vote of 3 trustees. Terminating David Park and replacing the CIO, that is a governance event with notice requirements and a 90-day transition clause written into the IPS. Gifting $5 million to a charity you read about last month. That goes through a philanthropic committee with a 60-day review window. The boundary is not arbitrary. It was drawn by people who watch other families move fast and regret it across a generation. You can express a preference in nearly any direction. You cannot execute most of them alone. Then there is the isolation. You cannot tell most people what you actually manage. Not the full number, not even approximately. The person you are dating learns something is different by month 2, not because you tell them, but because of the things that stop being explained. The driver who appears, the way travel gets arranged without visible effort, the phone calls you take in the other room. You watch them recalibrate in real time. The texture of the relationship changes. It is not dramatic. It is quiet and specific. Some people become more careful around you. Some become more interested. A few become both simultaneously. Neither version is the person they were before they knew. The discomfort arrives in month 4 and it arrives through your cousin. His name is Tyler. You grew up at the same holiday table. He calls you directly, which means he got your number from someone who should not have given it. He needs $400,000. He has a business opportunity, a real estate deal, specific and urgent. The kind of urgency that never quite survives a calendar. You listen. You tell him you will look into it. You call Sandra. Sandra does not pause. She tells you there is a protocol, a formal request form, submitted in writing, reviewed by the Family Advisory Committee, evaluated against documented lending criteria. The process takes 45 days minimum. She says this with no apology because no apology is required. Then she says something you write down. She says this happens every generation, usually in the first year, almost always someone adjacent, and the protocol exists because the money is too large to manage with personal obligation as a decision framework. You call Tyler back. You explain the process. He hears the word process and the warmth in his voice adjusts by a measurable degree. You didn't earn this money. He has never said that out loud, but it lives underneath the call and you both know it. That tension is real. It does not resolve. You follow the protocol anyway. Month 6. The first formal asset allocation review. David Park presents a 94-slide deck. The current structure is approximately 60% public equities and fixed income, 30% alternatives including private equity and real assets, 10% cash and near cash. He runs 3 stress scenarios: a 2008 style drawdown, a 2000 style equity correction, a liquidity crisis requiring rapid deployment. In the worst case, the portfolio contracts by 22% before recovery. That is $110 million on paper. Gone. Temporarily. Probably. You sit with that word. Probably. David uses phrases like expected recovery horizon and historical correlation patterns. The language is precise and the uncertainty underneath it is also precise. You ask one question. You ask what the family lost the last time the market dropped hard. There is a pause. Sandra answers it, not David. She gives you the number. You write it down. You do not share it here. What you share is the feeling. The dread of being the person sitting in this chair when the number moves the wrong direction. Not because you built it, because you inherited the responsibility to protect what someone else spent a lifetime building. That weight is not metaphorical. It shows up in the room at month 6 and it does not leave when the meeting ends. By the end of year 1, the finance is not the hard part. You have learned the machinery. You understand the IPS, the distribution schedule, the quarterly committee rhythm, the difference between what clears without conversation and what requires a governance event. You can read David's decks without flinching at the vocabulary. The hard part, the part nobody built a 47-page document to handle, is the question underneath all of it. Who are you inside this structure? There are 4 answers people in your position tend to settle into. Principal. The wealth is yours to direct, to deploy, to shape around your will. Steward. You hold it for the generation that built it and the generation that follows, and your primary job is to not be the one who broke it. Operator. You are here to build things, new ventures, new governance, a family office that functions better at the end of your tenure than at the beginning. Philanthropist. The capital is a tool for impact, and everything else is overhead. Most inheritors fail this question before they fail any investment decision. They drift between answers depending on the room they are sitting in, and that drift is visible to everyone around them before it is visible to them. You will have a moment in year 1 where someone says it plainly, not Tyler. Somebody at a dinner, a professional context, someone who finds out the shape of what you manage and responds with a sentence they may or may not have meant to say aloud. You didn't earn it. The room does not stop. The conversation continues, but the sentence lands and it stays. What you do with it is the first real decision that is entirely yours. You can respond with defensiveness, which is the most natural answer and the least useful one. You can respond with competence, which is quieter and takes longer to demonstrate. Or you can respond with purpose, which requires you to have already answered the identity question clearly enough to speak from it without hesitation. The people who inherit at this scale and actually hold it tend to choose the third option, not immediately, eventually. Here is the backdrop those people are working against. 70% of family wealth is lost by the second generation, 90% by the third. Those statistics get cited as investment failures. They are almost never investment failures. The money doesn't disappear because of bad stock picks. It disappears because governance erodes, because the family stops having hard conversations, because one person starts treating the distribution schedule like a salary they are owed, because the identity question never got answered, and so the behavior never cohered around anything stable. The $500 million you're sitting inside right now has survived long enough to be structural. The structures exist precisely because previous generations watched other families dissolve and decided to build against it deliberately. You are one of the reasons those structures exist. Year 5 is the first real fork. By then, you have made enough decisions with enough consequence that a pattern is visible. 3 paths tend to emerge. The architect builds. New entities inside the structure, stronger governance documents, direct investments in operating businesses, a family office that looks more sophisticated at year 5 than it did at year 1. The steward preserves and professionalizes. Quieter. The CIO is better supported. The compliance function is tighter. The next generation is being introduced to the machinery with actual intention. The dissipator does something subtler than spending. They give themselves permission slips. The lifestyle expansion that happens slowly enough to feel reasonable. The governance meetings that start getting delegated. The identity question that never got answered. So the money starts answering it by default. The $15 to $20 million annual distribution is large enough to fund any of these 3 paths comfortably. That is the problem. It does not force the question. You have to force it yourself. Year 10 is the long mirror. At 10 years, The $500 million, assuming a 60-30-10 allocation compounding through a full market cycle, is somewhere between $650 million and $850 million if the structure held and the governance held and the people around you were the right people. The freedom is real by then. You do not think about money the way most people think about money. That sentence sounds like a relief until you understand the replacement. What you think about instead is scrutiny, safety, responsibility. The question of what comes next stops being abstract because there are now people in your life, possibly children, certainly relationships, definitely the 12 to 18 people whose salaries run through this office, for whom the next generation of decisions is not hypothetical. The legacy question becomes operational. It moves from something you talk about to something that shows up in board meetings with legal language attached. What $500 million actually buys at year 10 is freedom from financial fear and a different kind of constraint. Not worse. Different. The cage is built from obligation, not necessity. That is a meaningful distinction, and it does not make the cage disappear. Define your role before the role defines you by default. Learn how the governance machinery works before you need it to protect you. And if you want to understand the structural map of how offices like this are built and what tier of complexity you are actually operating inside, the family office tier ladder video is the right place to start. This is what it feels like to live inside it. That video shows you how it was built.